Greetings, brethren, and welcome to our final presentation, Section 6, where we address this question, God's Storehouse, is it Waco today? This is perhaps one of the most controversial topics in Davidia today. But rather than shy from the issue, we're going to meet it head-on as a ship meeting an iceberg and leave the results with God. So let us begin. Is the location of the storehouse today Waco, Texas, where this city water treatment plant resides? Let's look at the facts, examine the evidence, and ponder it over, and make a decision. There are 4 statements that come from the Rod message that are used by Waco Davidians to justify the relocation of the headquarters to the city of Waco, Texas today. So we want to look at these 4 passages carefully. The first justification comes from Symbolic Code, Volume 1, number 10, page 1. It reads, "In order to fulfill the call, we must build the fort, cast the mount, set the camp, and the battering rams against it round about. This shall be a sign to the house of Israel." Ezekiel 4, verse 3. Hence, the first question to be asked is, where shall we build? The answer comes from him who is taking the reins in his own hands. Testimonies and Ministers, page 300. "In that day shall Israel be even a blessing in the midst of the land." Isaiah 19, verse 24. As no one puts a light in a corner, but in the center of the room, so the wise husbandman built a tower in the midst of his vineyard. Consequently, the Lone Star State, being in the midst of the land for both Americas, north and south, is the place where we must set the camp, so that the light may be equally diffused east and west, north and south. Moreover, the camp from where the battering rams are to be sent naturally must be centrally located, so that the distance between the rams and the camp may be cut down to 1/2, thus reducing the time and the cost for transportation and supplies as well as for mailing. And this passage was written in 1935. The second, third, and fourth justifications for being in Waco today are as follows. This one comes from Volume 1, Symbolic Code, number 11, page 1. It reads, "Our company, being composed of 12 members, signifies that it is to represent the foundation of this central headquarters location of the last and everlasting spiritual government." The next comes from Symbolic Code, Volume 1, number 16, page 1. "We are happy to announce that the headquarters office of the sealing message moved from Waco to Mount Carmel Center on September 29, 1935, and its new and permanent home location of the proclamation of the message of the true witness to the Laodiceans." So although they relocated in May of 1935, it wasn't until September here that they actually moved from the Waco City out to the property in Old Mount Carmel, and that's what this is referring to. And the final passage that is used is this passage from Shepherd's Rod Tract, page 75, and it reads, "Set the camp also against it, that is, make a temporary lodging place for your workers, headquarters from which to carry on the work, and make preparation to remain there until you have conquered the city." This is the devout purpose in building Mount Carmel Center. This is its given goal. So here are the 4 principal arguments or foundations or pillars by which Waco claims that we should be located, the headquarters there today. However, we have to view all that the Rod has published in regard to this. For example, consider other statements that were written by Brother Houteff before the light of the kingdom came. Of course, truth is progressive, and the kingdom truth did not come until after 1937. So let's look at these two passages. The first comes from Symbolic Code, Volume 3, Number 2, page 3. And this was written in February 1937. It reads, "In harmony with the foregoing command, Mount Carmel has begun to enlarge the place other tenths by doubling her acreage as announced in the Symbolic Code of blank, to stretch forth her curtains, organize, protect herself against all undesirable elements by establishing a thorough organization after the pattern of the theocracy of ancient Egypt." So Brother Houteff believed that this was going to be a theocracy here at Mount Carmel. And this passage from Symbolic Code, Volume 3, Number 11, page 2, also written in 1937. It reads, "Everyone who is well informed in the message that Mount Carmel is proclaiming knows that Mount Carmel is in no way endeavoring to take any institutions, but rather is endeavoring to bring about that reformatory movement long foretold by Sister White in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, page 126. Moreover, it is true that we expect 144,000 members from the Seventh-day Adventist denomination to join us, after which a great multitude from every nation, kindred, tongue, and people is to swell our membership so greatly that no man can number it." So Brother Houteff believed at this time that not only the 144,000 from the church, but a great multitude would be gathered there at Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. So he believed, Brother Houteff believed, that Mount Carmel would exist up to the close of probation. And that's reflected in this passage. And it reads, "It might be interesting to Elder G to know that the naming of our camp, Mount Carmel Center, came about in the same way as the naming of our publications, The Shepherd's Rod. For we did not know beforehand that it was in prophecy, until after our attention was called to Micah 7:14 and Amos 1:2. As Amos says, 'The habitations of the shepherd shall mourn.' It is obvious that Amos's prophecy is yet future, for the word habitations, places, is in the plural form, which cannot be applied to one shepherd's habitation, denomination, but to all that will be in existence at that time, at the time that Carmel withers," which is explained further. The prophet Jeremiah, in the following words, explains that this wailing by those who are thus deceived will be at the close of probation. "For they shall say, the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved." Jeremiah 8:20. That is, after the harvest, the time in which they could be saved, they will realize that probationary time has closed. "Then the habitations of the shepherd shall mourn, and the top of Carmel shall wither." Hence, before that time, the top of Carmel must have been green with much pasture. Otherwise, there would be nothing to wither. That is, though Carmel has now plenty of pasture, present truth, when probation closes, it shall be deserted. Whither? For says the Spirit of prophecy, in the time of trouble, we all fled from the cities and villages. Early Writings, page 34. Then, in their hasty, frenzied effort to acquaint themselves with present truth, which went forth from the top of Carmel, to their surprise they shall find that Carmel has finished its work, its habitations removed, and probation closed. Then it shall come to pass that they shall wander from sea to sea, and from north even to the east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, and shall not find it. And this is in Volume 1, Symbolic Code, number 14, pages 5 and 6. And this was published in 1935. So Brother Houteff clearly believed here that when Carmel withered, that probation would close, that there would be no more present truth, and that would be affected there at Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas. Of course, now looking back, we know that this possibly couldn't be the case, because it says here in the next page of this very same reference, Volume 1, Symbolic Code, number 14, page 5, "True, we are establishing our headquarters on this mount that is found in prophecy, but our stay here shall be very, very short." They honestly believed at that time that probation was soon to come, that the sealing message was going to be very short in duration. However, they did not see or foretell that they would be there for another 20 years, and that there would be a attempt at a knockout blow and a scattering time. And now over 75 years from this time. So not all the truth was made known in 1935. The scroll unrolled. Truth is progressive. So we have to analyze this in the context of history as well as prophecy. So let us look at this principle of progressive revelation. It's very important to understand to address some of the verses, such as Isaiah 19:24, in the midst of the land. It reads here in Great Controversy, page 343, "But no man, however honored of heaven, has ever attained to a full understanding of the great plan of redemption, or even to a perfect appreciation of the divine purpose in the work for his own time." And this would certainly be true of Brother Houteff. The truth unfolded. It was progressive. It didn't come all at once. And it certainly wasn't finished by 1935. Also consider this passage in Christ Object Lessons, page 127. "In every age there is a new development of truth, a message of God to the people of that generation. The old truths are all essential. New truth is not independent of the old, but an unfolding of it. It is only as the old truths are understood that we can comprehend the new." So we cannot say today that there's no more understanding to be found in the rod or in prophecies, that everything that was revealed was completed by 1935. For example, what about the prophecy in Ezekiel River? We've seen in our previous presentations how that had an application to the movement of the Storehouse, not once, but more than once, even after the death of Brother Houteff. Here's some other references to this principle of progressive revelation that you should look up and get familiar with. Selected Messages, Volume 1, pages 66, 67, and Testimonies, Volume 1, pages 206 and 207. Please look these up and get familiar with them. So let's apply this principle of progressive revelation to these rod references. And remember that God alone is infallible. For it tells us in Selected Message, Volume 1, page 37, "We have many lessons to learn and many, many to unlearn. God and heaven alone are infallible. Those who think that they will never have to give up a cherished view, never have an occasion to change an opinion, will be disappointed. As long as we hold to our own ideas and opinions with determined persistency, we cannot have the unity for which Christ prayed." Review and Herald, July 26, 1892. So how much more applicable is this passage to us today as Davidians, thinking that we have nothing more to learn, that we know it all? Lord have mercy. So unless we're willing to give up a cherished view, for example, on the new codes or other winds of doctrine in our midst, we're going to be disappointed. And we'll never have the unity for which Christ prayed until we all re-examine our position and are willing to see all the evidence. She also says, in regard to infallibility, I never claimed it. God alone is infallible. His word is true, and in him is no variableness or shadow of turning. Letter 10, 1895. So, Ellen White nor Victor Houteff never claimed infallibility. It is the word of God alone that is infallible. So this is what we should follow as our rule of faith. So let's look at the view on Isaiah 19:24. Because it was progressive. This is the keystone text. People will say, "Oh, the midst of the land, Waco, Texas," and repeat it almost like a parrot without analyzing all that the rod has to say about it. Here's the verse. "In that day shall Israel be the third with Egypt and with Assyria, even a blessing in the midst of the land. Now, is this only talking about Waco, Texas? I think not. Let us see what the rod says. We'll do a comparison. We'll look at how it was used before 1937, before the Light of the Kingdom, and then after 1937. So here's the passage that is used before 1937, and it reads, "In that day shall Israel be even a blessing in the midst of the land. Consequently, the Lone Star State, being in the midst of the land for both Americas, north and south, is the place where we must set the camp." That was true in 1935. However, is that the only application? The only understanding? Let's look at these two passages written years later. The first in 9-track, page 17. "This purified class who stand steadfast during the shaking in the midst of the land, the church," Isaiah 19:24, is also brought into focus in Isaiah's prophecy, chapter 24, verse 14. "They shall sing for the majesty of the Lord," whereas in verse 16 is projected a subsequent purified class who are gathered from the uttermost part of the earth, and from whom are heard songs, even glory to the righteous. The shaking, in other words, garners first fruits and second fruits of saints, one from the church, the midst of the land, and the other from the world, the uttermost part of the church. So here we see another application that the midst of the land is the church, not Waco, Texas. Also, consider this passage in 14-track, page 17. "Thus, in his infinite mercy, would the Lord lift the burden of Nineveh today, even as he did in the ancient day. Indeed, it is for a blessing in the midst of the land, even to all nations, that he is to effect the church's liberation from the Assyrian yoke." This is pointing to something that hasn't even happened yet. So clearly we see that there's application of this verse to things that are yet future, to the church as a whole, worldwide, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Not to just Waco, Texas. So let's take all that the author has published on the subject. Here's another example. Here are two passages published before 1937, before the Light of the Kingdom. The first one, "This central headquarters of the last and everlasting spiritual government," One Symbolic Code, number 11, page 1, implying as if this is the last storehouse or headquarters. That's what some people say. Also, this passage in Volume 1, Symbolic Code, number 16, page 1, it reads, "Mount Carmel Center is the, quote, permanent location." As if God's storehouse would never move? Is this true? Consider these passages that came later, after the Light of the Kingdom. In Volume 1 of Timely Greetings, number 5, page 5, written in 1946. It reads, "That the law of the Lord during the judgment day of the living is to go from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, not from Tacoma Park, not from Mount Carmel Center, and not from some other place." And this passage in Two Answer Book, page 48-49, it reads, "From these scriptures, it is plainly seen that Mount Zion becomes the headquarters for the last gospel work on earth, after the time the 144,000 arrived there, no longer from the General Conference or from Mount Carmel Center." So Brother Haddoff clearly realized at this time that Mount Carmel Center, Waco, Texas, was not going to be the last gospel headquarters. It was going to be Mount Zion, the kingdom, Palestine. Does this contradict these earlier statements? No, because Brother Haddoff didn't have the light that the future gospel headquarters would be Mount Zion, not Waco, Texas. So let us take all that the author has published, rather than cut and paste, selectively extracting a verse or a passage here and there, much the way that Sunday keepers use to isolate a passage here or there to justify Sunday over Sabbath. Come now, let us reason together. So what's the summary on this keynote text in Isaiah 19:24? 1. It is clear that the references written before Brother Houteff had the light on the kingdom cannot be used to prove that God's storehouse must be located in Waco today. 2. To insist that these statements are God's clear command for us to have his storehouse there today is fundamentally disingenuous and misleading. 3. It would require us today to go back to an application of this verse that met its fulfillment in 1955 and not advance forward with the latter light on the role of the kingdom as the last gospel headquarters for the preaching of the gospel. And finally, we should follow the most advanced light on the key verse, Isaiah 19:24, in question, where the blessing in the midst of the land is referring to the final gospel work to be proclaimed from Palestine, the kingdom, not Waco, Texas. So how do we understand this quote in Shepherd's Rod Tract, Volume 1, page 75? Because this was written and published in 1945. Well, here's the passage. It reads, "Set the camp also against it, that is, make a temporary lodging place for your workers, headquarters from which to carry on the work, and make preparation to remain there until you've conquered the city." And of course, conquering the city is witnessing to the Seventh-day Adventist Church until probation closes. So they claim, well, see, here it is. We're to remain there until the city is closed. However, let us look at all that has been published. If this is true, what about this passage published in 1930 in Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, page 128, which reads, "Set the camp also against it, that is, make temporary lodging places, that is, make preparation to remain there until you've conquered the city," saying the exact same thing. But where was the headquarters in 1930? It wasn't in Waco, Texas. It was in Los Angeles. So if this reasoning is true, then the headquarters should have remained in Los Angeles. But it didn't. It moved. And furthermore, notice it says, make temporary lodging places, plural. Not one location, but more than one. The storehouse would move, and we see from history and our previous presentation that indeed it did move after Brother Houteff died. So what's the summary on this passage from Shepherd's Rod Tract, page 75? If by the statement, make preparation to remain there until you've conquered the city, the prophet meant the physical site, he should have then kept the headquarters in Los Angeles, California, because the same instruction was given in California before he relocated the office to Waco. Therefore, the reference in 1SR Tract, page 75, cannot be interpreted to mean the headquarters was never to leave the physical site of Waco. And the facts of history confirm that. And let's look at that. What happened to Mount Carmel? The land was sold, and its purpose was fulfilled. And this is published. The symbolic code was resumed after a 9-year absence with this startling announcement in Volume 10, number 1, page 3. And this came out in 1954. Now again, with even greater emphasis towards their goal, Mount Carmel Center makes the following announcement to all faithful Davidians who will realize that this good news is perhaps nothing short of a sign. Mount Carmel Center, by commencing to first sell off its excess property, then the whole, is symbolically leading the way to the program that is outlined by the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy. Of course, this was the hunting program that we mentioned earlier in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 16. And here the startling announcement came that Mount Carmel Center was to begin to sell off its excess property, then the whole thing. And let's see what happened. Why? It says here in 10 Symbolic Code number 2, page 13, yes, with the city coming to our very doors, the peach orchard must go. The Waco city limits was expanding, no longer a rural location. So it was time to start selling off, starting with the peach orchard. That was closest to Waco. And this statement from a person that wrote in and was visiting Mount Carmel, he had this to say. In 10 Symbolic Code number 2, page 17, it reads, I am greatly impressed by the things I've seen and heard about the building up of Mount Carmel in the early days and the progressive selling off of land tracts as this purpose is fulfilled. Isn't this interesting? Mount Carmel built continuously, as we saw in that section 3 of our presentation, for 20 years, all the way up to 1954 in the new publishing house. And then all of a sudden, its purpose is fulfilled. They commenced a selling off to finance the hunting campaign, and it was recognized that its purpose was fulfilled. Brother Houteff had published the entire rod message from cover to cover and sent it out as leaves of autumn by the millions to the church, and it was complete. It was now time to enter into a new phase of the message, the scattering time. So by June 1956, the sell-off progresses, and this is recorded in 11 Symbolic Code, number 8, page 20 and 22. Now, this code was published by Florence Houteff, but it's only recording here factual information, not prophecy. It reads, in discussing this new undertaking with some of us, Brother Houteff emphasized the urgency of carrying out his part of the work, the selling off of the excess property, without delay as quickly as possible. And so it was that before Brother Houteff's death, Mount Carmel successfully got underway the subdividing of about 35 acres. It was Brother Houteff's deep concern at the time of his death, however, that the subdividing of the rest of the land would require a great many customers, which Waco may not have unless some new industries or other installations were brought into Waco, thus causing a need for more housing. And as I related to you in detail a few evenings ago, many changes later did take place in Waco, which materially altered our situation in regard to the selling of land. Those changes were brought about by a variety of factors, chief among which were 1. Increasing sharper competition, and 2. The new regulations and requirements of the city incident to our being taken into the city limits. So these reasons precipitated the sell-off of the whole. First the part, then the whole. So this was done, just as Brother Houteff published and expressed his desire, his concern of this encroaching city limits. So things happened so quickly that even the cemetery itself was dug up and relocated out to Rosemont Cemetery in Waco, Texas. So nothing was left behind of old Mount Carmel. Also, we know from inspiration and the very basis that Mount Carmel was established that God's headquarters must be outside of the city, not inside of the city limits. And here's a passage from Volume 1, Symbolic Code number 10, page 3, to verify this. One thing was clear in our minds concerning the new home for our work, that we should have a rural base from which to operate, one with enough room to demonstrate that the Lord made no mistake when he told us through his messenger that we should be out of the city and in an environment conducive to health, and one where we could care for the needy among us and furnish employment to those who are learning how to give the message. This is very plain. There is no excuse for the headquarters to be in the middle of a city. In this passage, in 10 Symbolic Code number 1, page 6, be it therefore known that part of Mount Carmel property is being subdivided for high-class residences. They sold it off and made good money at it. And a nice upper-end neighborhood was built and occupied by the Gentiles, non-believers. So let's look at the geographic facts here. This is a map of Waco, Texas in 1936. The area surrounded in green was the location of Old Mount Carmel, next to scenic Lake Waco. The area here in red was the city limits of Waco. Clearly, Old Mount Carmel, as we've seen in aerial photographs in the prior presentation, was outside the city limits by some distance. And it remained this way all the way up until Brother Houteff announced the sell-off. The city limits were expanding. So they had a nice rural country location. Look at this current map of Waco City. The area in black is the approximate location of Old Mount Carmel Center. And the area in red is the current city limits that expanded in 1956, just as Florence Houteff reported. This rapid expansion, it completely engulfed the area and the entire Lake Waco itself. And it's a very developed neighborhood. Waco, however, is somewhat deceptive. They give photographs like this, giving the illusion of a rural location to those that have never visited the place. Those that are perhaps in Indonesia or Africa or the Philippines. But is this the case? Perhaps we should turn around and see what's on the other side. The current buildings on the site are this print shop that they built several years ago. The old print shop, that's the only portion of the original Mount Carmel Center, the print shop that was built in 1954. This arch structure, that's a church that was built by the Presbyterians who they bought it from. And that's pretty much all that's there. A small fraction of the original property, a couple acres compared to the original of over 330 acres. Even the central building, B8, the administration building, which is across the street, is in the hand of a private prep school, the Vanguard Prep School. This is the only building that remains, besides that print shop, of all the buildings that were built up there on Old Mount Carmel. So this is the only building that's left, and it belongs to a private high school. Now, if we turn around from where I took that picture of their entrance, this is what we see. High-class neighborhood, residential, nice homes, nice mature trees. Here's another angle looking over towards Lake Waco. High-end neighborhood. The other end of the street, a water treatment plant for the city of Waco. This is interesting. Is this appropriate sign of God's headquarters? If you go down Mount Carmel Drive and drive around the original property boundaries, you find schools, shopping malls, heavily developed commercial areas. Nothing but city. So the doors closed, and old Mount Carmel was sold. Here are the facts. Mount Carmel property was completely sold off. It's a fact of history. It can't be refuted, and it was ordered by the prophet himself. 2, the site is now a city, completely a city. 3, the prophet predicted that there would be an attempted knockout blow and a scattering time, events that resulted in the closing down of Mount Carmel Center. 4, Mount Carmel became a neighborhood for high-class residences. Unbelievers now fully occupy what was the once vast majority of the original site. Even the graves of the pioneer, including Brother Houteff himself, were unearthed and relocated off the original property. The words Waco and Davidian have become the subject of almost universal scorn and mockery since the burnout of New Mount Carmel Center in 1993. This was David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in the infamous government standoff. Unfortunately, this is associated, so it's almost used as a scourge by the church against those that profess to believe the shepherd's rod. So it's not exactly a flattering connection. Finally, instruction from the prophecy of Ezekiel's river reveals that God's storehouse should move in an overall eastward course. It moved once on the basis of this prophecy in Brother Houteff's day, and it's moved there afterwards on 2 occasions. These facts can't be refuted. So the purpose of Old Mount Carmel was fulfilled. It had a 20-year time frame, and then it was sold off. So what conclusions can we draw from our presentation? 1. The statements from the Old Symbolic Codes, Volume 1, Number 10, Volume 1, Number 11, and Volume 1, Number 16, were written before the Light on the Kingdom truth. And as such, Brother Houteff believed that Mount Carmel Center would exist up to the final close of probation and would gather in the 144,000 and the great multitude and set up essentially a theocracy right there in Waco. Therefore, these statements cannot be used to prove that we must be in Waco, Texas today, just as none of us would insist that it's all right to eat pork because Sister White did not condemn its use in 1858. Secondly, the statement from 1SR tract, page 75, does not mean that we must remain in Waco, Texas, till the close of probation, but that we must have a camp, a headquarters from which to carry on the work of reformation, regardless of its location. The idea being that the Storehouse can move, and it certainly has. 3. That originally, before having the Light on the Kingdom, the early Rod believers had expected their stay in Waco to be very, very short. They did not envision remaining there for 27 years, selling the property, or the enemy's attempt to deliver a knockout blow. All of these truths were revealed later as the scroll unrolled. 4th, instruction was given to sell off the entire property as quickly as possible because the city was encroaching upon the site. Thus, we cannot go back now that the area is fully engulfed by the city of Waco limits, when it is no longer in a rural setting. Today, Waco is a city of several 100,000 people, so it's not a rural location by any sense of the imagination. 5. Brother Houteff predicted the enemy's effort to deliver a knockout blow and a scattering time, which led to the closing down of Mount Carmel Center, and God allowed for this to take place. 6. The conditions that made Waco an ideal location for the work in the 1930s and 1950s are far different today. Most Seventh-day Adventists in Brother Houteff's day were located in North America and Central America, and Waco was an ideal location as far as reaching them with the postage stamp. But today it's far different. Most Seventh-day Adventists are on the other side of the world, in places like Africa, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and also Central America. So to reach the world field today, we clearly see outlined in the Spirit of Prophecy a multitude of publishing houses. And this is the only way possible to reach 16+ million Seventh-day Adventists. A different program has to be in place, and it is outlined in inspiration, as we showed in our previous studies. And finally, the present-day Waco Association has had nearly 21 years to make good on the claims of being, quote, Mount Carmel Center. And what are the results? Compared with the rise of Old Mount Carmel Center under Brother Houteff, what have these people accomplished? Do they have a rest home to take care of the older Davidians? Do they have a school for the children? Are they in a rural location? Do they have agricultural enterprises? Do they publish the original Rod literature and the original Rod charts? Sadly, they come far short, and the fruit shows otherwise. What can be said about this current relocation? Well, I think the Bible sums it up appropriately in Amos chapter 9, verses 3 and 4. And though they hide themselves in the top of Carmel, I will search and take them out hence. And though they be hid from my sight in the bottom of the sea, thence will I command the serpent, and he shall bite them. And though they go into captivity before their enemies, thence will I command the sword, and it shall slay them. And I will set my eyes upon them for evil, and not for good. Thus saith the Lord. So what can we say of those that make an idol out of a piece of real estate on the top of Carmel? Brethren, the light has shined. The facts are here. Let us move forward. If we're ever going to reach our brethren, beloved brethren in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there must be a multitude of publishing houses around the world. 7 people can't rule the world from Waco, Texas. The facts are here. The evidence is out. Prove all things. Hold fast to that which is good. Let us move forward and leave behind cunningly devised fables. And cease ye from man whose breath is in his nostrils. Thank you for your time. May God bless you, and we hope to meet you in that blessed hope, the soon coming kingdom. God bless.